you're creating opportunities, it's competitive. Like it's worse. I mean, maybe they haven't gone through this, but I've had some teams where they're in the wrong division or whatever, they're getting blown out. Right. Because I was going to say that I've had some players that just miss the goal, and it's helps to just tell them, okay, forget about trying, just test the keeper, just hit it right at the keeper, or just hit it hard. Like, a lot of times they'll miss it out. So their XG is probably pretty high. That's true. That's one thing I do. I'm training. They're in front of an open net or whatever else, and they puff around and they don't play. And they go. But you do that now, in the game, that's what you should tell. You got to put the whole model. What's the word? What's up? Are you still setting it up? Or?
We're good to go, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Show you. Yep.
Give you some volume. Give it a try. We'll see. I think we're good.
How's it going, everyone? Hello, hello. Oh, geez.
A little too much.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming to OctoberFest. I appreciate that we have a number of people here from actually 3 different meetups: the React meetup, the Angular meetup, and the one of the testing meetups. So it's great to see everybody here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jeff Welpley. I am one of the co-organizers of the Angular meetup. We have a number of different people here from the different meetups and some familiar faces, people I haven't seen in literally like 4 years, which is crazy. Appreciate that. Let's all give a big round of applause right off the start to LinkSquares for the awesome food and the hosting. Thank you. Rico's been the main person setting everything up, so thank you very much, Rico.
No problem.
All right, we have a packed agenda, so I want to get right into it, and then we'll maybe do some additional housework in between some of the talks. So first up, we have Babitoff, who is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. Used to be one of the directors of engineering at Cypress, so knows everything there is to know about automated testing, end-to-end testing. Now with a new company and has a lot more to talk about. So let's give a big round of applause for Babitoff.
Thank you. All right, yes, welcome everyone. Thanks to LinkSquares for hosting. Really appreciate, a chance to meet person to person. Next time, let's do it over the Zoom, right? No? Okay.
Could have been an email.
Slack channel. Yes, I'll tell you how to test things without fear because our topic is both Halloween and OctoberTest. So I'll try to combine the two. I'm not sure about you, but if you look at the picture of Shanghai 20 years, well, it's 30 years, and then how it looked 10 years ago, it's a huge progress. And this is how I feel about web development. A lot of people hate web development, but if you think about how much we've come so far. HTML and HTTP was invented like 31 years ago, so we literally started there from nothing. And now we have all sorts of frameworks. Jeff's favorite resumable frameworks are coming. You have server-side rendering, all sorts of crazy tools and technologies, and it's moving in the right direction. And some people hate it, right? But I'm okay with it. What I hate really about web development is trying to test an individual framework component. So in this case, this is part of component test for, in this case, Angular navigation. And you have all this weird syntax and all this weird code, and all it does really, it verifies the two buttons have text, home and log in. And you're like, I have to write all that just to test home and login? And it's not even the worst part. The worst part is that before that test, you have to set everything up. So this is the before each test initialization code. So you have 40 lines of code just to write the test that has 10th line of code just to confirm home and login buttons text. Not good. Scary, right? So if you think about Shanghai and web development and where it is, and skyscrapers and all the bright and shiny things, the component testing is kind of like this, scary basement where you have lots of custom syntax that you have to learn for that particular framework. You have very slow feedback loop, right? Trying to see why something's not working, trying to develop a test in parallel. The worst are the cryptic errors that you get if something is wrong and if something is not set up correctly. And the maintenance is a nightmare, right? You might be familiar with the framework and the testing tools, and when you set up a test and then you leave because someone offered you a better job, and the poor person who has to maintain your test usually just abandons the whole thing and starts from scratch. Okay, so who likes writing tests? Well, I guess you cannot vote, right? So I prepared something for you. Jeff, can you pass this around, please? Just give me one. Okay, so I prepared something to make this realistic. Instead of like thumbs up and thumbs down, because our topic is OctoberTest and Halloween. If you like what I'm showing, you can always show the beer mug, right? If you're scared by testing, or if you don't like something that I'm showing, you can show me the ghost, like, ooh, boo, scary, right? I had way too much free time today, so. But I did go to Workbox specifically to print and cut this out, so I did do something for you. Okay, your table gets nothing because you did not prepare enough, yes. You can voice your disapproval. Okay, so who likes writing tests today? Okay, well, 50-50, you can tell, right? But, it's not a pleasant experience. Okay, so how can we make it more pleasant? In this talk, I'll show the current state of front-end testing using, Cypress, and I'll do a lot of examples. And I hope the people in the back can see the examples. If not, the slides are online. Believe me when I say it's easier the way I show it, and then you can check it out later yourself. Everything I do is online, everything I present is online, and all the open source projects are on GitHub. And I do have a bunch of free and paid courses on testing, and I'm a member of a couple of local climate organizations, trying to fight the climate crisis, because we're all wearing, t-shirts, and it's not normal on Halloween to wear a t-shirt, if you ask me. Okay, I do work at Mercari, it's an online marketplace, and everything I'm showing, I'm trying to apply at work as well. Okay, so here's our first example. But home and login buttons are part of this website. I did not write this website, although K-dramas are awesome, obviously, but it's an example I just took from someone else. And this is what I'm trying to test. I can click on login, it logs in, and then shows other buttons, and I can log out. Okay, so here's how I would test it in this particular framework. I would install Cypress. It's just npm install. It would install and download it for me, and then it's MIT open source. I don't have to pay anything. And at this point, right, I took an existing project with home and login, and these are the testing tools and dev dependencies that it already had. It's an Angular project in this case, and it has Karma and all these dependencies that I had to kind of know and make sure they all are compatible. And I replaced them all, right? When I did npm install Cypress, that's all I needed. I could remove all other testing tools. Exactly, yes, yes. So usually when I install Cypress, I say it's end-to-end testing tool. You would write a test where you would visit localhost or your staging environment, finished URL, and you would test the application. But I don't want to do that today, because we're talking about component testing. We want to test our component before we actually bundle and deploy it somewhere. So this is what we will do. We'll click on component testing, and it detected Angular. Or you could select the framework that you're using, and boom. The whole setup and configuration is done. And now I'm ready to write component tests in this code base. And what Cypress under the hood does when you select the framework, it actually auto-detects, and it says, okay, your framework is the Angular. Could be Vue, React, Svelte. And this is a bundler that I detected, because now there is Webpack, Rollup, Bit, and so on. So who likes this configuration where you literally just say, yeah, I approve? Exactly, exactly. I think this table agrees, right? This is easy. I like easy. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to test. Log in, see this thing. Let's write a test. This is the call test that clicks on the button, navigates, sees everything. And the unusual things about this, we're importing the component into our test. Okay? And then there is a Cypress command called SciMount, and you just give it a component. You're not visiting a site anymore. You're just mounting that component, and after that you say, okay, there is a link called home, with text home, there is a login, you click on that, and then there is home, profile, logout, and you can click on logout, and then it shows home again, and login is visible again. So the interesting thing about this is that when you click on the spec, you can actually see what you would see in application, right? It clicks on the thing, and you can display everything. It actually shows the component running as it were in the full application. For Angular, it even loads your style from Angular, the JSON file automatically. So, and it's all real browser. You can see dump snapshots, very fast test. The most important thing to me is that you can see a component, how the user sees it, because it's meant to be on the page. So why are we testing using JSDOM in Node? That makes no sense. Okay, so when you do SciMount and you give it the component, that's framework specific. So Cypress, by detecting your framework and the bundler, knows the framework, how to bundle it correctly, and how to start, how to bootstrap a mini web application so that your component starts running on the page. And after that, it's regular Cypress commands that don't interact with the component directly. Instead, they interact with a browser page, like a real user. They go through the DOM, no more Angular or React-specific stuff. And Cypress comes with batteries included. That's why you only had a single dev dependency. Everything else, like bundlers, commands, assertions, Xenon, are all included. You don't have to install anything else for the first couple months, I would say. In particular, if my navigation component takes an argument which is sign-in service, and when you click on login, it actually calls that service. And when you click logout, it calls that service logout. And you want to confirm it, you can say the following. You can import navigation component, import sign-in service, and then create a new instance of signing service. Because it's bundled using the same bundler as the application, it all works. You can just create it. And then you can create Synon spies, which are all part of standard Cypress API. You can mount it and pass that component properties. Now, don't look too closely at the syntax. The syntax doesn't really matter, and we'll see it, but it's all the same kind. You're passing component properties. But then, when you click on the login, you can check using Cypress command, hey, get me that spy, and it should have been called. And you can confirm the arguments and how many times it was called and so on. And this is how it looks. You can click on the test, and you can see when it calls login, spy, and log out. And you can debug it and understand what happened. Okay, the best thing about everything. The best thing. This example of this particular component and the existing test came from a repo I did not write. These were example tests that were written in the repo. Angular test with test harness. This is the test I've just shown that does the same thing. We completely collapsed all this extra setup, syntax, all the syntax that specific to driving events and so on, to minimum amount of code that uses standard commands. Okay, let's vote. Who likes the shorter test that you don't have to think about it? Here's my component. Exactly. Another example. You're thinking, I'm not mounting an instance. I usually want to mount a whole template, right, with a bunch of stuff, and I want to pass some, maybe event listeners as prop, like on email subscription. You can do the same thing. So this is Angular. We pass the template, and we have to say these are the imports that implement particular things inside. But then we use normal commands. We interact with component on the page. We click on a button, and we get that event handler, and it confirms that it was called with the email and subscribe true object. And this is how it looks. You can see the freaking component running. And each step is reflected right here, and you know that when you wrote this email, click subscribe, that event property was really called with expected arguments. So you literally set up your component, let it run, interact with it like a real user, and confirm that it produced something visible in the outside world. Again, much shorter than other ways that are currently available in the framework. Okay, this is not just Angular meetup, this is also React meetup. And React people are really a little antsy, I would say, right? They're like, what are we looking at? I have no idea. Okay, I'll feed you, don't worry. I have not forgotten about you. So imagine there's a game and there's a timer component. This is the test for timer component. You import the timer, you mount using JSX if you want, and you make sure that it starts with 00, and when you do this, it looks like this. Okay, it does make sense, but it doesn't look like a real game. In a real game, it's supposed to look like that. So why does it look 00, unstyled, just text? Well, in the real game, you probably have some global styling. In my previous Angular examples, I was lucky that every component had local styling. Here, I need some global styles and some local styles. So when I write the test, in my spec file, I can just import global styles. And the only thing I have to make sure is that when I mount JSX, that I create a structure similar to what the real application does, so that component can have correct global styles applied. And another thing about React, you usually get data through props and from, let's say, context provider. You can also grab it from cookies, window, whatever. But in this case, you just mount your component and you surround it with whatever context providers you want with the values that you want. In this case, it's like 900 seconds, and it immediately shows you, yeah, 15 minutes passed, and it starts ticking, and it looks correct. if you look at React testing utils, this is a test for like something like a toggle switch where we toggle 5 times. Look at all the syntax that you have to learn just to get a simple test going. And this is equivalent test. You mount the component, you pass on change, prop, stub, and you interact with the component, you click as many times, you confirm what text it has, and if that stub was called as many times as you expected. Okay, one API, doesn't matter. You write Angular test, you write React test, but it's only the side mount that's a little bit different, depending on the framework. After that, once you learn it once, you learn them all. Okay, for React specifically, because you don't believe me, I know you don't trust me. I would not trust a guy in this pink, hoodie myself, but Murat Özkan has an ebook where he collected all sorts of React examples. It's crazy. He literally has like hundreds of examples, but he collected across so many React testing websites and books, right? And he wrote equivalent component test using Cypress React component test. And he's like, here's it is, huh? So you can see one-to-one mapping. Like you can implement everything and it actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, so think about components in your application. It's like a pyramid. You start with like something small, like timer. Imagine Sudoku game. There is a timer, numbers, difficulty, smaller components, and then they assemble into a game, which is the whole thing. And then there is a top-level app. So why does it matter? It's very easy to test the timer. You know why you want to use a larger component eventually? Because there you can pass the data, but you cannot pass from end-to-end test. And I'll give you an example. This is a Sudoku game. I'm testing the game component, and I can pass the initial array of numbers and solved array of numbers. Something that usually the game generates randomly. Something where I cannot control from end-to-end test. But now, I'm running the same thing, and I can say, okay, after I pass you these two arrays, this is what you get every time. Everything is pre-filled except for 3 numbers. And it's the same every time. But the entire game runs like a full application. You can control everything, and now you can interact with this game. You can say, I want to click on the first 3 empty cells, I'll give a number for each, and then it should be solved. And that's what it does. It solves it, shows overlay, full end-to-end test, but it's a component test. Right? It's something I could not reach from end-to-end test before. Okay, but you might ask me, Gleb, I paid close attention, and I see that during that component test there was a 404 network call. What's up with that? Right? And this is a very common problem. When my overlay shows up, we pass how long it took to solve a game. In this case, only 2 seconds, right? Because it was a very fast test. Inside the overlay, it uses useFetch, but actually makes a call to the network and says, okay, give me how long it took previous people who solved it, so I know if I'm good or bad, right? And then it shows the thing. Okay, so now the question is, when you're writing component tests and they have something external, they go to the backend, what do? Do you stop fetch? Or do you stop import of fetch somewhere, or import of useFetch hook? Or do you stop something else in your internal source files, right? The tests become brittle because you tie your test too much to implementation, especially if you try to stop an import or stop, in other class. Now each test depends on all these implementations, and you change one thing and all of a sudden all the tests have to be updated. Stop doing that. This is the better way. In this test, let me see, right here, I'm using a Cypress command intercept. It's a network proxy outside the browser. It's like Mac work server or Mac service worker, yes? Forget that one. That one runs as a service worker. This thing runs outside the browser. It's completely, fully, I would say, more powerful, by a factor of 1,000, but who's counting? Anyway, I'm saying whenever application makes this call, delay a response by 1 second and give it for a 4. Backend says, no, I like, right? And then you mount your overlay, you pass the timeout of time of 90 seconds, and you confirm that overlay shows loading, and when it goes away, and how does it look? 1 second, and when it goes away. Again, loading, goes away, and doesn't throw an error, nothing. So my overlay is actually handling the network error. If I want to be, testing happy path, I would say, okay, whenever someone sends me get times 90 seconds, respond with a fixture, with a JSON fixture of time durations, and then you can confirm that it shows all the previous timings in quotes, and my timing of 90 seconds is highlighted. It has a special path. No more internal stubbing. No more tying your component test implementation. Just think about what your component does with outside world. Network, cookies, local storage, index DB, all that sorts of things that are standard. Okay, Svelte. Pick Svelte, pick bit, write the test, import component, mount, pass the props, Svelte specific syntax, and you're good to go. If you've seen one component test, you've seen them all. View examples. Pick view, take the component, mount, same thing. You can mount using JSX, same thing, and then confirm that the text is showing and you can see it. Okay, benefits of component testing in Cypress. It's a real browser, you see everything. You have a real component running as a mini web application. Full Cypress API. All the commands, except for site visit, obviously. You no longer can visit the full URL. You mounted the component, it's running. All Cypress plugins. You want to do visual testing? Yeah, go ahead, no problem. Right? It watches your spec file, which includes importing the source file, so if you change anything in your application code or any of its dependencies, it reruns the test. So you can do full test-driven development and just keep running, and those tests are fast. Okay? And like I showed, dump snapshots, videos, screenshots, it's all there. You don't have to recreate it. On CI, it's the same thing. Cypress run, -- component, and it runs those. So run those first, because they are fast, before you run end-to-end test. Okay, so you can vote now. You have only 2 options. Right? But to be fair, right? I wrote this component testing thing a long time ago. It just now became part of official Cypress, and they dropped something I built in, which was code coverage and easy ES6 import stubbing, something that just had. And my heart aches. These things are necessary. You want to prove that you tested everything. You can still do it, like I have examples, but it requires you to write a webpack yourself, right, to insert those plugins. So that's the only downside, but I'm sure they'll add it later. Okay, slides are available, the code is available. If you have any questions, I'm available. Thank you so much. I appreciate listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lab. We will take a couple minutes to switch out speakers, and so you can get a drink, go to the bathroom, etc. And we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes. Okay?
Heavy feedback here. I don't want to mess with these too much. I'm not a master of the board here, but
That seemed to do something.
sorry.
They at least invite you to launch party.
feedback. Yeah. Hello, are you Kristen? How's it going, Jeff?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And is your last name pronounced Jacqueline?
Jack Voney.
Jack
It's like
Voney.
rhymes with pony.
Okay. Jack Voney, got it. It's a great office, man.
Yeah.
I really like it.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. We have the 18th floor. You have to go through the other elevators to get to it. It's kind of a pain in the ass. You have to go like back and forth between elevators.
Oh, in order to get to here? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But they're adding like more floors.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Growing like crazy.
Yeah, they're like nuts.
That's good.
Test, and I'm sure this person has a question, and I can chat with you after.
That's why I'm here. Oh, yeah. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the board. This was a lot of fun. Not since the very beginning of the company. A couple of questions. Yeah. So, we are now at just
Yeah, well,
one of the issues we run into is number of assumptions or just what they do require.
they so many matches.
Ready, Kristen?
Let's say our invest is X amount. We work on that to
That's gonna be right up there. Yeah, I'll be
All right, we're going to get started.
Oh, what about the button on the mic? It's green. Should be good.
All right, we're going to get started with our next talk. So we have Kristen Jacqueline here, who lives, breathes, and eats testing. So written books, podcasts, every sort of content you could think of. Is here to talk about getting organized with Postman. So I know Postman is something that I've used a lot in the past. It's sort of the console log to some degree of testing. But I'm really looking forward to hearing what Kristen has to say of some advanced usages. So let's give a big round of applause for Kristen.
Hello. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I can't really hear myself, so this is good. All right. Just before we get started, I just want to thank Rico for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for coming out here tonight. Do we have anybody here from the Ministry of Testing tonight? Anyone know? Oh, a couple people? Great. All right, well, the good news is I'm really happy to see you. The bad news is I gave this same talk online in June of 2020, so I hope you're not going to be too disappointed if this sounds very familiar. So I'm wondering, how many of you out there use Postman regularly for your API testing? Okay, good. Lots of people. Good. All right, well, if you don't use Postman, I'm hoping that you can still get some interesting information from this, especially when we talk about some different organizational patterns. You could think about even for your Cypress tests or other automated tests, how you might want to organize them. All right, so let's get started here. So a little bit about me. I am the principal engineer for software testing at Paylocity, which is an HR and payroll software company. I have a blog. It's called Think Like a Tester. You can find it at thinkingtester.com. I'm also a LinkedIn Learning course author. My course is called Postman Essential Training. And finally, I am the author of the new book, The Complete Software Tester, which is now available on Amazon. All right, so why get organized? So here's a picture of somebody's garage. Thank God it is not my garage. This garage might have a lot of really useful things in it. There's probably a circular saw somewhere in there, or maybe a cordless drill might be in there. Probably lots of great tools, but the person who owns this garage, when they need their tool, are they going to be able to find it? Probably not. It's probably going to take them longer to find the tool than it is to, go out and buy a new one. So that's why we want to get organized with our Postman requests. So if we've got Postman requests and assertions, and but nobody knows how to find them, you don't know how to find them yourself, your coworkers don't know how to find them, they're kind of useless, they kind of waste your time. But if you have your Postman tests organized very well, they're always available for you. You can use them in a second to do quick regression testing. And it's also really helpful to be able to see where your test coverage is, see what you have, what tests you might be missing. All right, so my talk today is going to have two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the various elements of Postman requests, and then in part two, I'm going to be talking about the patterns that you might want to use to organize those requests. So let's get started with part one. Okay, so first of all, requests. You're probably all familiar with a Postman request. That's the basic building block of using Postman. So when you are organizing your requests, you're going to want to stick to naming and capitalization conventions. You're going to want to give your requests descriptive names so that you can find them easily later. You don't need to include the HTTP verb in the request name unless it makes sense to do so. You can see here in our requests, Postman is already giving you the verb right there. So you don't need to put get in the title of your request because it's already there. So this is just saving space. Don't make the names too long. And you can also use pipes for visual clarity, which is what's happening right here. I've got 5 different kinds of GET requests. All of them are getting a list of employees. Some of them are getting a list of employees at a multi-company. That's like a company that's like a chain. For example, you could think of like a pizza chain or something. And then some are just from a single company. And then it's also varying who is making the request to get the employee list. So sometimes it's the admin making the request, sometimes it's an employee, and down here it's even a terminated user. So rather than make a really long name that says get employees for a multi-company as an admin, I'm just using the pipes to make the title short. Okay, let's move on to assertions. So assertions are very important in your Postman requests because this is where you're actually asserting that the response you're getting is what you were expecting. So make sure to think about what you are really trying to assert. You don't feel like you have to assert on absolutely everything. Figure out what is going to validate the request you're making, where you're getting the appropriate response. And then put the assertion at the highest level you can. A lot of people don't know that you can put your assertions at the collection level or at the folder level. And I'll be talking about that a little bit in a couple slides. And then give your assertions names that make sense so that when your tests fail, or even if they pass, you'll be able to look at them and it's going to make sense to you what just happened. So on the next slide, I'm going to have some examples of good and bad names for assertions. So, bad assertion name, status code. If you get a test failure that says status code on it, you have no idea why it failed. What kind of status code were you even looking for? A better assertion name is status code is 200. Now you know what you're looking for. Now you know if your test fails and you see failure that says status code is 200, you say, oh, I was expecting a 200 there and I didn't get it. A bad assertion name, correct record is returned. How do you know that it's the correct record? What are you asserting on? A better assertion name is correct employee ID is returned. Now you know what you're actually looking for. If your test fails, you can see, oh, I didn't get the right employee ID back when I got that employee. Bad assertion name, error message is returned. What kind of error message were you expecting? We don't know from the failed test, but if you have missing last name, error message is returned. You know exactly what kind of error you are expecting. Okay, so let's talk now about where to put your assertions. So you can put your assertions at the collection level. That's like the highest level of your folders. And a good thing to do here is to put assertions here that will be the same throughout the entire collection. So some examples here would be header assertions. Like if you were expecting that you're always going to get application JSON back in your header for the content type, you could put that at the top level. Or response time assertions. You might want to say, I want to make sure that every single request I make in my collection is going to come back within 3,000 milliseconds. So you can put that test right there, and then with every request you run in the whole entire collection, it's always going to run that assertion for you, and it'll fail if your response time is too long. So you can also put them at the folder level. So at the folder level, you could put any assertion that's going to be the same throughout the entire folder. So some examples here would be response code assertions. So if you were expecting, like let's say you had a negative test folder and you were expecting a 400 back every single time, you could put that assertion right there. And then you can, it just makes it easy to, if you ever have to make a change to that test, you're only changing it in one place rather than on every single assertion. And then you can also do body assertions there if you were expecting the same response body every single time. So then finally at the request level, this is where most people know how to put assertions, and for there you can put any assertion that's going to be unique to the request, such as maybe JSON data that's coming back, or a response code if it's going to be different for all of the requests in your folder. Okay, let's move on to environments. So you probably know that an environment in Postman is basically a collection of variables. And those variables are going to be environment specific. So if you're pointing to your dev environment, you'll have one collection of variables. And if you're pointing to your prod environment, your variables might be different. So when you are naming your environments, I suggest keeping them consistent. The practice that I like to do is I like to have the name of the API first, and then I like to have in capital letters what environment I'm pointing to. The reason why is because it's very, very easy in Postman to be pointing to the wrong environment and say, why are all my tests failing? Well, it's because you're pointing to the wrong environment. So if you have it in nice capital letters, it's easier to notice where you're pointing. So then another suggestion I have would be to keep your environment names short. And the reason why is because, for those of you who've used Postman, in the environment dropdown, it's kind of short, and sometimes the name will stretch out beyond the dropdown. So if you have an API with a long name, then you can't see what environment you're using. Is it prod? Is it dev? You don't know. Okay, so for the variables themselves, remember that the variables are case sensitive. This will be very frustrating to you if, for example, you're using a company variable and it's got a capital C in your environment and you're trying to access with a lowercase c, and then you're wondering, why isn't my variable being populated? And then decide on a capitalization pattern and stick with it, because then that way it'll be easy to remember while you are running your tests. I recommend not using abbreviations, even though you might wind up sometimes with variables that run around the corner. The reason why I recommend not using abbreviations is because you will forget what abbreviation you decided to use. So if you decided, oh, well, for company, I'm just going to use CO because that's nice and easy and short, then when you're writing your test, then you say, okay, well, I need to reference that company variable. What is it again? Is it COMP? Is it CO? And then you have to go back and look in the environment to see what it is. So I recommend just don't use the abbreviations at all, and then it's easy to remember. And then give your variables descriptive names. So don't call it user1. That might make sense to you what user1 is, but if any of your colleagues go to use your collection and your environment, they're not going to know what user1 is. Give it something more descriptive like user with credentials. That's pretty clear. User without credentials. User with admin access. These are all very helpful ways to name your variables. Okay, going on to folders. So a folder, the awesome thing about Postman is you can have folders within folders within folders within folders. So for people like me that like to make everything very, very organized, it's really fun. So I recommend keeping everything in a folder, just like if you were going to go and organize your office and you had a whole lot of papers. You wouldn't want to just leave some papers lying around loose. You want them all to be in a folder. Follow a pattern when you put your requests in a folder. Don't just tuck it into any random folder. Put it in a folder that makes sense. Give your folders easy to read names. I recommend definitely naming them with good capitalization and spacing so that they're easy to scan through when you're looking for your folder. And then stick to those naming and capitalization conventions. So here in my example, I have a video encoding folder. For the videos, we're encoding lots of different kinds of videos. So I've made a folder for MP4, I've made a folder for MOV, one for WMV, and then finally I've got a folder for non-videos for my negative testing. Okay, and then we have collections. So collections are like the top level folder. And I recommend naming your collection after your API because then everyone's going to know how to find it. So don't say something like authentication, then people have to go and they have to look in the folder to see, well, what is it? But if you say, security identity API, say, oh, I know what that API is. That must be where the requests are that I want to use. Use a naming convention with standard spacing and capitalization. And then you can also use the favorites function to move your most used collections to the top of your workspace. So that's just that little star there. If you start, it's going to always be at the top for you, so you can always find it fast. Finally, we have workspaces. So workspaces are like something that's allocated just to your team. So every team should have its own workspace, and then you can keep all of your APIs in that one workspace. But make sure that you're only putting necessary things in the workspace. If you're doing a lot of putzing around, trying different things out, you're going to want to do that in your personal space. So it's not cluttering up the team workspace. And then also think about who should have admin rights in the workspace. Sometimes people are really good with the tests and they're very careful not to make changes. They're going to mess everybody else up. But if you have somebody, a culprit, who tends to make changes to the workspace that then mess up all of your tests, you might want to take their admin rights away. Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise now. I'm hoping that you'll be able to see it at this level of magnification. It's called Which is Easier to Use. So in the next screen, there's going to be 2 different test collections for the same API. Both of them have exactly the same tests in them. They might be a little bit out of order, but they're both exactly the same between the ones on the left and the ones on the right. This is the RESTful Booker API, which is just a test API that allows users to create, update, delete hotel bookings. And so my question for you when we go to the next slide is, where is the request to update a booking where the booking ID is not found? Okay, so updating a booking, the booking ID is not found. So I would like you to try to find it in the collection on the left first, and then try to find it in the collection on the right. Okay, let's go. So it's an update the booking where the booking ID is not found. Okay, have people found it in the left request yet? I mean in the left collection? How about the right collection? Did you find it in the right collection? Updating where the booking ID isn't found? That's pretty easy, isn't it? It's right here. It's a put. It says it's a put. It says booking not found. That's pretty easy to find. Over here, Not so much. It's it's actually the very first request in the negative folder, but you can't really tell that, can you? Because whoever saved this request did not bother to actually give it a name. So instead of giving it a name, they just hit save, and what Postman does is it just saves the URL, and so that's not entirely helpful. So you can see right there just how much easier it is to find things when you have organized your collection very clearly. Okay, let's move on to section 2 of my talk, which is about organizational patterns. So let's talk about scenario 1. You have a simple API for managing your customer's contact info. The API has operations to create, update, retrieve, and delete customers. And then the create and update operations also have field validations on them. Things like, is the required field populated in the post request, or are there too many characters in the post, or whatever. So for this pattern, or for this scenario, I recommend the happy path, sad path pattern. So what we have here is, we've got one folder, which is for the happy path requests. I've called it basic endpoint tests. And then we have another folder for the sad path requests. Those are our negative tests. So this is good for small and simple APIs. And you can use the happy path folder for a simple regression check. If you've made one change to your code and you want to just make sure that all of the requests are running like they should be, you can just run through that happy path. Or you can use the sad path folder for checking validation functionality. So if you changed a validator on your API, and so now you were using something different, let's say to like validate a phone number or something like that, you could just run through that whole negative test folder and make sure that all of the validation was still working correctly. Okay, scenario number 2. You have an API for managing your department's training inventory. The inventory has endpoints for adding, updating, retrieving, and deleting entries for videos, podcasts, books, and blog posts. So we're going to have a lot of different endpoints here. So for this, I recommend the endpoint pattern. So this is good for APIs with a lot of endpoints. You can have a folder for each type of endpoint. You can have subfolders for different operation types. And if you want to, you can even add subfolders to do happy path and sad path requests. So what we have here is we've got our training inventory API, and we've got a folder for every single one of our training types. We've got videos, podcasts, books, and blog posts. And then as a subfolder, you could see under blog posts, for example, that we've got a folder for adding blog posts. We've got a folder for getting blog posts. We've got a folder for updating blog posts, and we've got a folder for deleting blog posts. And then further down inside of those, we've got both happy path and sad path requests. So I didn't put these in a subfolder, but you could do that if you had a lot. So I've got happy path, updating blog post, and then I've got a couple sad path there, missing title or having a title only. Okay. Scenario 3. You have an online bookstore that needs to manage customer orders. Customers can create and update their account, search for a book, place an order, and request a return. So for this scenario, I like to use the user stories pattern. This is good for customer workflows where they're going to go through a certain kind of flow of behavior. It has a folder for each workflow, and then you can have subfolders for different scenarios. So this is our online bookstore API, and so our different workflows are create new account, update account, search for a product, make a purchase, and then request a product return. And you can see inside the make a purchase folder, we've got different kinds of scenarios involving making a purchase. We've got customer completes purchase. We've got customer cancels purchase. We've got customer updates the cart before the purchase. And then finally, we have scenario 4. You have a student transcript API that manages the grades for all the students at a college. You want to make sure that bad data doesn't get into the database. You want to make sure that only authorized users can read and update the data. So for this scenario, I like to use the validation type pattern. So this is good for APIs that are going to require a lot of validation, but they're also great for security testing. You can have folders for things like missing data, character limit violations, invalid characters, invalid data types. So what we have here is, first we've got a bunch of different kinds of validations. We've got header validations, JSON body validations, missing field, invalid field type, field length violations, URL validations. And then in the second half here, we've got a whole bunch of different kinds of security testing. So in this case, I'm doing a lot of negative testing. I want to make sure that there are things that my users of this API can't do. So I've got the student scope. So when the student is using the API, they should not be able to request another student's grades. Or they should not be able to update their own grade. And then we've got the instructor scope. So things that the instructor can't do. They shouldn't be able to request a student's grade from another class, or they shouldn't be able to upgrade the grade of, update the grade of a student in another class. Okay, so those are the 4 patterns I have for you, and I am all done. Do you have any questions? Quiet group. Okay, well, thank you very much. Just as a reminder, the Complete Software Tester is now available on Amazon. And I've got my LinkedIn Learning course, which is called Postman Essential Training. And then finally, you can find me at my blog, which is Think Like a Tester, thinkingtester.com. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kristen. And next up, we're going to have Anand. And by the way, as you come to set up your stuff, we have a lot of swag up here. If you guys have not gotten it yet, both Anand's company, Apple Tools, and LinkSquares have various little knickknacks that your kids or loved ones will love, or maybe yourself. I don't know. There's a lot of beer cozies, all sorts of stuff there, so definitely check that out. Also, I want to recognize, while they're setting up, I've mentioned some of the different groups here. Is there someone from the React group, one of the organizers from the React group that's here?
It's just me.
Oh, just you. Okay.
Just me.
Okay. So we have, had a long time during the pandemic that we haven't had in-person events. This is, this month, last month we did a small thing as well. This is our sort of venture to do in-person events. I think this is going pretty well. I think we will continue to try to do this, so I appreciate your support. Definitely on meetup.com, or does React still do it on the meetup.com as well?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Definitely you guys can post on the chats there if you guys have feedback of what you like, didn't like, what you want to see. I know Sharon and I, who's the other co-organizer here, Sharon DiOrio, we always want to think about whether it's just talk-based, like we have here tonight, or sometimes we do just hang out, like no talks at all, just some food and chatting and getting to know each other or whatever. So definitely let us know. I'll maybe send out a poll, and we can kind of go from here what we're going to do going forward. So appreciate that. And you ready, Anand? Okay. So next up we have Anand, who's going to be speaking on something that actually I'm really excited about this talk. I've been excited about all the talks tonight. But one of the things I always, as a software architect and that type of thing, you always think about when you go on a new project, like, what should I use here, and how do I think about that? And I think you're going to get into a lot of that decision-making process, right?
Hopefully.
Okay, here you go.
Thank you. Hi everyone, good evening. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organizers, LinkSquares, to host this. It's great to see such a great turnout. Really missed this in-person events in a long time. So thank you all for coming in. It's tough following Gleb and Kristen for what they've done. And I do have a lot I can talk about. It really depends how much you want to listen to me. I know it's been a long day already. Okay? So, we can make it really short. Let me ask you a question. What is the best test automation framework? If you give the right answer, we can end it here and have some more drinks.
Cypress.
Cypress, okay. That's one answer. Anyone else? Selenium, anyone else?
For one to use it.
Sorry?
The one that everyone would use.
The one that everyone would use. And which one would that be? Okay. So I guess we are divided, so we will have to wait for some more time till we get the answer on that. So let's get started. I'm Anand Bagmar. I've come from a pretty close place for this meetup. I've traveled from Pune in India and really excited to be here. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, whichever way. I'm very happy to continue the discussion beyond this. So let's start with a $1 billion question. I actually updated this right now. I had it as a $1 million question, but who cares about millions anymore, right? Let's start with the $1 billion question. Which is the best tool set? I'm not talking about just automation, the best tool set that you can use for your automated tests. We already had some divided opinions, so I'll not ask again. We will get divided answers for that. But whenever anyone asks me that question, this is my reaction. And it could be me. I still have a little hair remaining on me right now. In a couple of years, probably I'll look very similar. But the reason of this reaction is there is really no easy answer for this. There are no best tools, there is no best practice, there is nothing best per se. Okay? And I strongly believe that whatever works in the context of the team that adds value, that becomes best for that particular team. Something that is working for this team on the table over here might not work for another team because it's different context, different things they're doing. So it's important to remember that context is very important in coming up with a decision how you want to choose your tool sets for automation. And the rest of this time, we will try and figure out what is that context, how do you understand that context to come and reach the decision. Okay? So first of all, what is test automation? It's a safety net. Why do we call it a safety net? If something that was working earlier fails or stops working, your test will give you that feedback instead of you, or worse, your users of the product finding and reporting that as an issue. Right? So automation will give you that quick feedback if something is going wrong. It will not catch new defects. It will tell you if something that was working earlier has stopped working. There's a big caveat over here. Your tests have to have the right assertions as well. Right? But that's what your automated test will tell you. Now here's a question. Does what you're trying to do with your application, what type of issues you're trying to catch from your application, if something is working well or not, does that even matter? I see some heads nodding yes. Yeah? Okay. Sorry, I had a couple of drinks. I can't see which side you took up over there. Was it the mug or the ghost? Okay. But of course it does, right? Because you need to understand what is the type of test you're doing, what is the validation you're trying to build, and how best you can capture that. So that's where our old favorite test pyramid comes into picture, which gives us a reference of what type of test can be there for your application. Now I'm going to use two different references of the pyramid over here, two different images, but all it indicates is depending on your application under test, figure out what are the different layers that are applicable to you, and based on that you would build your automated test around that. Okay? So now let's focus on top of the pyramid. Okay? Top of the pyramid is a system test or your functional test. End-to-end test is better than just calling it functional test. Right? These are your end-to-end tests, and that is the aspect we are going to focus on now. So functional test automation. We know this is the silver bullet. It is going to solve all the problems in the world for us. How many of us believe that? I know we've got a mixed crowd, which is good, but if I ask this question to testers, they live by this, right? STETs, they live by this. Automation is going to solve everything. I need to do more and more UI automation, end-to-end automation. Unfortunately, it is not the silver bullet. You need to understand the context, and the context depends on what is the problem you are really trying to solve over here. Are you working on web-based product? Is it mobile web, native apps? Is it desktop as well? What is the domain of the product? Is it B2B or B2C? I think these aspects do matter when you come up with a tech stack for automation, because the scale of the test, the number of tests you need to write, the complexity of these tests that are going to be there is going to matter as well based on what type of product you're building and testing. The safety net that we spoke about, you need to think very closely based on your application, what layers of the pyramid are going to be applicable for you, and how are you going to get the feedback in the fastest possible way. You cannot be thinking anymore, or sorry, let me ask this question instead of saying what I think about it. How many of us in our organizations, we may be doing it or we see others doing it, other teams doing it. Do we have the concept of nightly test runs? Yeah? Why do we have nightly test runs? The feedback cycle is just so damn slow. We cannot afford to run these tests on every check-in that is happening. In fact, side note, this is a separate topic that I talk about. How many of us have smokes, regression, sanity, and whatever other types of suites of execution? Okay? Another reason why we have this is because our feedback cycle is so damn slow. We need to break it up to get the feedback faster. That's why we say, okay, let me run a smoke test. If this passes, then I will run some more tests. If sanity passes, then I'll run some more regression tests. If you build your automation the right way, if you focus on the test automation pyramid, you should just be calling it, these are my end-to-end tests. In a general sense, we think about the end-to-end test should be 1% of the number of unit tests that you have. So if I have 100 unit tests, I will have one end-to-end test representing the application. Think about it, if you have got a nightly test run, how many end-to-end tests you have, and does it even correlate, come close to that 1% of the unit tests? The pyramid is a great reference to think about where you are and where you need to be. Look at it very closely. So coming back to our functional automation. A very important aspect of thinking about the tool set is who will build it, who will maintain it, and who will evolve it. I heard answers, Cypress, Selenium. I didn't hear any other tools. There are a lot of good tools out in the market. I myself am a Selenium contributor, but I don't hesitate to use some other tool if that is the right tool for the context. Right? It is very important to think about who is going to write the tests. After writing the test, are they handing it over to someone else? And if there's going to be some other set of people who's going to maintain and evolve it. And if you don't put that perspective in mind, the minute you walk out of the door or move from one table to the other, that framework is going to start falling apart. And this is based on my experience of more than 20 years in testing and automation. I've seen this fall apart too many times. Because this context is not set in correctly. We start building or choosing tools, tech stacks based on what we like, we are comfortable with, but not putting the other perspective in mind. Okay? So is it developers who are more technical oriented from a programming perspective? Test decks, they are also supposed to have the same skill set with an additional testing mindset. Is that really the case or not? If not, what is the gap, and choose accordingly. Okay? A very important aspect to remember, and again, this is unfortunately I have seen and heard this too many times. We want to use tool sets to make it easy for some set of people to write tests. Any one of us have heard that? I hope we are not the ones who are making that statement. Because that is, in my opinion, a very, very incorrect way of thinking about how to approach automation. We want to encourage and challenge team members to get better in that skill sets, grow in the skill sets, get better, and implement the test in a better way. Okay? We don't want to dumb it down. We want to keep it easy for sure. We don't want to dumb it down. Because when you try to dumb it down, you start taking shortcuts, implementing magic in your frameworks, which is going to come and bite you in the rear end at the wrong time. Okay? So it's very important to think about what is it that we are trying to aspire towards and how we are going to build towards that. So based on this, what I could call it philosophy of mine from automation perspective, I sort of think about automation frameworks as having two set of criteria. One is the non-negotiables, what my automation framework has to have as features and capabilities. The other is the non-negotiables. Depending on the context of the application, you might want to choose it or not, right? So let's talk about some of the non-negotiables. Clear and visible intent of the automated test. Many a times we see our automated code as just lines of code making calls to we might use page object pattern or whatever else that might be there, any different pattern. But we just see code over there. What is the intent of the code? We are talking about end-to-end tests at top of the pyramid. What is the business scenario that is being automated by that test? Is that evident from just looking at the test, what is going on? The test itself is so cluttered because you have implementation details, you've got assertions mixed along with it. The intent of the test is lost. Anyone looking at it does not know what is happening here. A new team member comes and joins you. They do not know what is that test representing. So clear intent is extremely important, and unfortunately most of the solutions will fail here. It is important to know the business rules and how do you implement that. That is very critical to have. The next aspect is reusability of the code that you are writing. We are not writing implementing one end-to-end test or 10 or 100. In many cases, complex enterprise products, we are implementing hundreds of these end-to-end tests. How easy is it to reuse snippets of what you have implemented in an easy fashion and maintain it and evolve it as well? That is a very important criteria for any automation tool that you use. Test data management is again something that is not thought about much. You need to think about, is it environment specific data? Because your test might run against QA, dev, prod, pre-prod, whatever different environments. How do you manage test data across all of these without having to make any manual changes in your framework? How do you manage dynamic data? So for example, if I have to create a user, I cannot create a user Anand every time because the first time it will work, second time it is going to say user exists. My test is going to fail. So how do I say I want to create a username Anand, but my test is automatically going to add some maybe random suffix to it or anything to make sure it's a unique user, and I'm creating that every time. So you have to think about the dynamic data aspects in your test framework as well, how it will handle it. And then there is also a different approach. You need to think about test data. Not everything can be created. Can you create and destroy the data for each test? Can you seed the data in your environment for your automation that you can leverage easily as existing users, for example? Or can you query for data that might be existing in your system and intelligently, dynamically use that data to implement or execute your tests? So I want to select a book that exists as inventory in order to purchase it. So can I search for a book which has an inventory and use that book to purchase, right? So your framework needs to have these capabilities in order to be able to be reliable and deterministic for each and every execution. In the same lines, you have to think about API interaction. While we are doing a functional end-to-end automation, can I make API calls to set up the data or create the data that I might need? Going through the UI is going to take a long time, but can I make API calls to make that happen? Querying is something we spoke about, but important thing over here is create custom DSLs when you have to do all these operations. It has to be very easy for anyone else to understand what is that API or what is that method going to do. From execution perspective, of course, speed is most critical. So you have to build for parallel execution versus distributed execution. Both of these are different, especially if you take the context of, or rather let's take an example of I want to run on an Android and an iOS, or sorry, let's take a Samsung device and maybe some other Google Pixel device, right? I have 10 tests running in parallel means each of those tests is going to run on the Google Pixel and the Samsung device. running in distributed means I'm going to spread out my 10 tests across the available devices. So they might end up running 5 on each as an average, right? And both of these strategies might be important when you're thinking from an execution perspective. You should be able to run against local changes, as well as you should be able to run against a deployed environment. So your test framework needs to be able to do that in a very easy fashion. You should be able to support multi-browsers, multiple types of apps or devices, and of course CI is a no-brainer. Without CI, automation framework is not an automation framework, in my opinion. Think about it. Do you need a commercial or open source tool? There could be different criteria that is required for it, right? The cost aspect is one, but the license cost is one aspect. For open source, you also need to think about the person cost, the effort required to build and maintain. That becomes a very important aspect. But the important thing about any of these is the tool extensible? Is it maintainable? It works great for 10, but what about hundreds of tests? Is it going to scale? That is important to think about. And as team members come and go, how easy is it for them to continue on that journey as well? Scalability is again a very important aspect. Can you run it across multiple platforms and browsers? How easy is it going to be for that based on the number of tests that you keep adding? Okay. And of course the support. No tool, it's like a software product that we are testing. Automation tools will also have defects. They'll have problems. What is the kind of support you get from the either the tool provider or the community in order to fix those problems in a quick way? Or can you fix it yourself and contribute back to the project to make it working for others as well? So these are again very important criteria when you're choosing any tool set, and these are the non-negotiables that we are talking about. Important thing, it has to be inclusive. And especially the case for commercial tools where it cannot be only the testing team will have access to it and the developers will just tell you what the reports are. That is not inclusivity. You need to make sure developers can also run the tests, see the results and contribute to that as well. So everyone should have access to the team, on the team. Version control, of course, the tests have to be under version control so that you can see what has changed around that, and that goes for dev as well as test code. Magic, I don't believe in magic, not in automation. There's a lot of good magic possible out of automation space. I would love to see that. But in automation, there cannot be any magic. It has to be a very, very deterministic journey. Though this is an example of a railway network, a simpler example would be an airport which has multiple runways. The runways there, the flight will take off from one gate, go to another gate at a destination. But each airline will have its own different way, each type of airline will be different, each journey is different. Each unique journey is deterministic and you need to test for that. So make sure there is no magic which automatically handles situations and you are able to test very deterministically what is expected from your product. Last is reporting requirements. Just knowing what has passed or failed is not sufficient. Gleb showed a great report in terms of the Cypress report where it had screenshots and API request responses. It is very important to understand what is happening and where the test is failing so that you can get to the root cause. Use hard assertions, soft assertions, whatever is applicable to your product and implement it in that way. But an important aspect which a lot of tools unfortunately miss out on is having trend analysis or failure analysis from the execution. It's not sufficient just to know what was my last test run cycle. How did it compare with the earlier cycle? And is there a way to correlate that? And that information can give you a lot of insights into flaky tests, and those flaky tests could be because of different reasons, test or product or environment, infra issue, various different aspects. So debugging and root cause analysis has to become very easy, and you should not need to rerun the test in order to find out why it failed. So that is a very important aspect. So take help of screenshots, video recordings, browser or device logs, network traffic if required. Capture all of this as part of your execution itself, attach it to the report. So if something fails, look at this data and you can figure out immediately why it has failed without having to rerun it. Okay? Some other criteria other than the non-negotiables, what might be important is a locator strategy. How do really you collaborate with the developers, make sure you've got unique IDs so that your test can become very deterministic, you can identify the locators in a better way. Don't use complex XPaths. This is unfortunately, again, I've seen a lot in test frameworks. No complex XPaths required over here. You have to think about the other integrations with other tools and libraries, build versus buy versus reuse. You don't have to do everything on your own. See what you can plug in to get added capabilities. Maybe you want to integrate with other cloud solutions from an execution perspective. How easy is it to do that? Visual testing, I've put it into negotiable category because it truly depends on the risk appetite of your application. What is the risk of something going wrong in production? Is your brand going to suffer? Is your revenue going to suffer? Are your users going to move because of certain visual issues that might have come up? Based on that risk, think about how you can include visual test automation as part of your functional testing. The criteria that is important though for visual testing is it should handle dynamic data. We are not building static products. Our products have context, they are living products, they are contextual, data keeps changing, so pixel comparison does not help in such case. So how can you build capabilities that will help work with dynamic data? There should be no false positives, and of course, it should support all the platforms your product is applicable on. If your product is on web and native apps, then the same tech stack, if it supports all of these platforms, it makes it easy for you to build these tests in a better way. So challenges of visual testing, of course, is accuracy of comparison, creating the baselines and evolving the baselines as your product evolves. So how easy is it going to be to allow these kind of capabilities to be addressed? You have to think about that. And that is where Applitools comes as a very natural choice in most cases because it will support all your different platforms that would be there. It uses AI for comparison, which is very accurate. From a scaling perspective, the ultra-fast grid, native mobile grid can become a great way to scale your execution with a single test execution itself across all those different browsers and devices. You've got capabilities for contrast advisor and in form of accessibility. There's root cause analysis and A/B testing capability as well. So these are certain things that if your product is using, having as features or the way you're building it, these might be great. This might be a great way for you to integrate visual testing along with that. Last aspect, which I think is very important, which is not thought about in functional automation, is functional performance benchmarking. Typically, performance testing is done at the end in some other environment by some other team. But you could very easily capture the way you're building your framework. You could capture the time taken for your UI test, end-to-end test, how much time it's taking for specific business operations. Login, for example, how much time is it taking? Purchasing a book, whatever set of orchestration required to purchase a book, how much time is that taking? And if you trend that over a period of time, you could potentially see a deviation in this time of execution that might give you some insights. Is your application getting better or worse, or is it okay? So functional performance benchmarking can give you great insights to your application before we get into the performance testing cycle itself. So let's start concluding what's next, right? How should you proceed? Evaluating with an open mind is very important. I've got a bias for certain tools, bias against certain tools. But if I have to start on a new project, that bias is not going to help me. Evaluate with an open mind. Think about the product functionality and features, the current state and the known future. What is the desired end state of quality? That is very important. Everyone says, I commit to 95% code coverage from unit tests. Is it even feasible? And if yes, if that is what you aspire to, then you have to do whatever it takes to get to that stage, right? So commit to the desired end state of quality and take steps proceeding towards that. Come up with your own automation pyramid, what makes sense for your product. And then start defining a strategy based on that. Understand the product tech stack, understand the integrations of your product, because that's where your test automation is going to start becoming slow, or it can become flaky. Based on the interactions of your product, does it have storage systems, queues and listeners, sync versus async APIs, what is in your control versus what is not in your control. So again, Gleb had a great example of stubbing out API as part of your component test. But as part of your end-to-end test, you cannot stub out the external system, the payment gateway, for example. So how much of testing can you really do with a real integrated system versus not? You have to understand these aspects before coming up with a strategy. Look at the skills and capabilities of your team. Think about coded versus codeless. Think about open source versus commercial. But main thing is focus on the value that you will be able to get from your automated tests. Okay? Identify and implement very specific targeted POCs before you finalize any tool set to make sure it is going to really help you. Remember, it's important to fail fast. The objective of POCs is not to implement a full feature or a full framework. It's to prove if certain thing will work or not for you. And fail fast is very important in that aspect. And last bit, define a path to production. From dev code all the way to production, what is that path? What are the environments? What tests can you run in different stages of that path to production? And how can you automate that in an easy way? That will help you a lot. Okay? So test pyramid we spoke about. Having a unified dashboard is going to be very important to understand your status of automation, what is the backlog, what is remaining, and build for scale, increase coverage, and quick feedback. Okay? So data strategy, parallel execution, visual testing, these are things that can really help you get to the next stage. So with these negotiable and non-negotiable criteria, if you put that in the perspective, your choice of tool sets start narrowing down very quickly based on what you can commit to, what is your aspiration of quality, and with the targeted POCs, you'll be able to choose the right framework, right tool set for you. So with that, I will pause. I did not look at the clock. I don't know how much over or behind I am, but yes.
I have a question. So taking all that, then what's the right framework?
I usually prefer to build my own framework because I can control what is negotiable or not on the context of my application. But in some cases, maybe just a Selenium IDE, for example, can work as well, a record and playback as well. The context is very important. What's the product that you are testing? Yes?
You mentioned one of your considerations is coded versus codeless solutions. I'm wondering, have you ever seen a codeless solution work for a company?
A codeless solution has worked for me. That was a small project. It had a very well-defined lifetime of the project. It was not a long-living thing. And you wanted to get some kind of automated feedback quickly without investing a lot in scripted automation. So that was one use case from my past life where codeless has worked for me. Would I use it again in the future? Maybe, maybe not. Again, it depends on all those parameters, right? But to me, the biggest criteria where the codeless solutions so far lack is the ability to show me the clear intent. What is the test that I am automating? Because that is my self-executing documentation of the product. And if I don't see that visibility, then that tool probably is not right for me if I have to choose it. Yes?
How would you divvy up responsibility, or what strategies would you feel is successful divvying up responsibilities and quality from a software engineer standpoint and an SDET standpoint? Would you say software engineers should be responsible for this, this, and this, or does it really depend on the company? What strategies has worked for you?
It actually depends on the context, as you said, right? Context of the corporate organization culture, product, skill sets. So I'll just repeat the question in case if others didn't hear it. What is the responsibility between developers and SDETs? How would you give them different responsibilities from a quality perspective? Typically in large organizations, developers cannot do everything because there's just too much to be done. Ideally, they would take care of development and the automation because that's all core, right? It's their natural skill set that comes into picture. But then it becomes very challenging to get meaningful deliverables out for a complex system. So in such cases, again, rule of thumb or as a guideline per se, right, more than anything, unit testing, contract testing, API testing or component testing is developer responsibility. Collaboration with developers to build the API workflow and the UI testing, the end-to-end testing, is estate responsibility. And in all these cases, a QA responsibility is very important to make sure what aspects are important for testing is shared with these different roles, so they are including the right scenarios for automation, the right test cases for automation. So QA role is also very important in this, the testing mindset, right? Are you thinking about the big picture? Are you thinking about all the scenarios that are there possible? And which layer of the pyramid can that be automated best? That's the collaboration of QA, estate, and developer. So in most cases, that's how I would split it up.
Would you have those resources embedded on the team?
I would not have it any other way if it is my choice, if it is in my hand. It has to be working as one team, one way of working. And this also means there are other roles who need to take the responsibility, the product owners or business analysts, whatever you call them, right? Because they are the ones who are going to sign off on the user story if the quality is as per expected. So if you have your definition of ready, your definition of done, then the product owner or the business analyst have to sign off saying, yes, acceptance criteria is met, all aspects of testing and quality are met, now I sign off on the story, we can release to production. So they also are very important in this aspect. Anything else? How do you build a good working knowledge? Working knowledge of the tools that are available. How do you build that? Right? Attend such meetups and events. That is one great way. You get to learn different perspectives. Important thing is to remember that whatever the speakers say, that work for them in their context. Okay? It will not work for you. You have to prove yourself wrong and say, yes, this will work for me. Don't start the other way around saying this will work for me and then find out it is not. Right? Take the pessimist approach. Gleb showed great tool Cypress for component testing. I am saying it will not work for you unless you prove it that it is going to work for you. Or Kristen told about Postman. It will not work for you unless you prove it is going to work for you. That way you are taking the decision, the responsibility of the decision. You are not saying I learned this from Gleb, I learned this from Kristen. Right? It is your experience, you are putting that context in mind to say, yes, this is what is going to work for me.
So given that, what in mid to larger size organizations, what do you think about different groups using different tools versus standardizing? Because there's benefits in and to either one.
Yeah. So the question is, if in large organizations, should it be standardized tool sets or each team should have the flexibility of choosing their own? I think it's a bouquet of choices that the teams should have, right? The organizations should standardize a certain set of tools based on different parameters, and the team should have the flexibility of saying this tool works better for me than the other, based on, again, the other context, the skill sets that might be there. You don't want to probably invest yourself too much into just one tool, one tech stack, because then you're trying to force fit it into some other place where it might not work very well. So I would say have a couple of choices that teams have the flexibility to choose what's going to work for them. Okay. So if no other questions, please enjoy the swag. I would encourage you to sign up for a free license of Api Tools. Take it for a spin, and let us know, and we'll be happy to send you some more swag after you have tried it out and share your feedback with us. We'd be really happy to get some feedback from you and see your experiences as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity again. Hope I was able to create some more confusion for you than give you answers into what is the best automation tool. Yep. Thank you.
And let's have one more round of applause for all of our speakers and our host LinkSquares. Thanks a lot. So you guys can hang out for a little while. In about 15 minutes, I think the cleanup crew is going to come in and start cleaning up or whatever. But definitely thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again next month. All right, have a good one.
Next month, man, setting the bar high.
I know. Throwing it out there.
So
time to merge all meetups to just meetup, Boston meetup. That's it.
I'm not saying that
Actually, that's not a bad
doesn't
idea.
still exist, because it does still exist, and I own it now.
I mean, imagine this was split 3 ways, right? Like today. Disaster.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
Since you left no time for questions.
So,
I-
about
you have a
merging the meetups.
for like when
You said you own.
and we very recent
Yeah. Yep.
and
this
so
print,
I listened to your talk.
Lena?
I was like, yeah, okay,
She has JavaScript, right?
The Boston JavaScript.
Yeah.
Boston JS. I think she's the one that pays for the Slack. She is still at Vista. She's on maternity right now. It took me a while to get in contact with her because I didn't realize. So I did bring it up. I was asking her if she wanted to promote it on the Boston JS meetup, and later she wanted to talk about there's so many things like.
And then there's Jet Looper with the view.
Yep.
I don't know if she's still at Microsoft.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like with Webpack, I'm doing a ton of crazy stuff with Webpack, and it's the same thing with the test with Cypress. Like you tweak it a little bit, if you want to use module federation, right? Like, but it's still Webpack config, and it's still JavaScript. Like everyone should be interested in it. So,
Yeah, the cross-pollination talks for sure. Yeah. And, it doesn't even have to be like anybody who gives credit for it. It's just like, but being able to advertise across the platforms. I mean, obviously the Angular and GG we can talk about whether or not they should just be under the same umbrella just for administrative purposes. But wherever there's a talk that has broad appeal, we should be getting everybody to put the word out and make it clear that this is how it's going to be for, maybe forever, but certainly in the near future where not everybody's ready to sit every day.
What's is there a cadence to LinkSquares want to do stuff in the future? I you know what I mean.
Everybody here has been so helpful. Like all the signs and stuff. Like I used to do that myself. I didn't have to do any of that. Getting approval for the money, my recruiter took care of that for me, and they didn't even do a plug. So I'm assuming that I should be able to do this hopefully monthly. That's what I'm going to push for. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, Sharon and I are experienced. What's the half-life of sponsors? I mean, you've lived with us through 3 sponsors.
I guess. Sorry, good.
It's like a year and a half, 2 years.
That seems to be the 18 months.